Equestria is a monocurrency system. We have seen the ponies deal only in bits, although precious gems and metals presumably exist, they are not used as a form of currency. Unfortunately, monocurrency systems often lead to stratification. When funds are used in a closed system with limited resources, the funds eventually wind up back in the same hands. A real-world example of this is serfdom, where farm crops and materials made is used to sell to the nobility, and the monetary return that the serfs get is again paid back to the nobility to pay rent. In MLP, there is a clear circulation of currency. We even have an example of inflation when the grocer decides to charge 2 bits for an apple instead of 1. As a side note, it's also in this episode that we see a slight sliver of greed emanating from ponyfolk. This leads me to believe that Equestria is not without the concepts of greed, bribery, and deception, but that's getting off topic. In any case, when inflation sets in, throwing around currency in one part or another of the kingdom will be of no use to increase the perceived value of currency, as it functions as one unified market. The reissuance of currency is a common method of increasing value of the banknote, or in this case gold pieces or bits, but this method is short-sighted and often does not work. Since people will quickly realize some fault with the new currency, such as purity, as is often the case with gold standard monetary systems, or if it's a faith-backed banknote system, it's possible that the reissuance of currency would be seen as a weakening economy and thus be valued less, negating the usefulness of the reissuance. In addition to inflation, a monocurrency system encourages the development of a caste system. Like with the serfdom or imperialist example mentioned earlier, with no way for the currency to fluctuate its value relative to a separate standard, certain members of the community would certainly stratify themselves from the rest, as we see with Canterlot ponies as opposed to Ponyville ones. There is a middle ground, of course, as we do see the Crystal Empire seemingly work off an entirely different system, and I'm inclined to think that the Crystal Kingdom works, at least economically, either like a communism or a socialist society. As I have not seen exchange of currency happen in Crystal Empire, and given the communal nature of the Crystal Heart, I'm inclined to think that the kingdom is an example of true Marxist communism, where every pony works for the benefit of every pony else without the goal of independent growth. Incidentally, such a society is not possible in reality, as human ambition dictates that we all want to be at least a little happier than we currently are, and humans as a species often seek change in order to obtain what we personally see as a better life. Obviously, this would not work for a second, as in a world with limited resources, gaining something means taking it away from somebody else. The average human being usually has 80 people that they are close to, are compassionate towards, and have a general concern for in their lifetime. The human brain is capable of having some sort of meaningful relationship with a maximum of about 250 people. So obviously, for communities larger than 250, true Marxist communism is not really practical. The absence of currency in the Crystal Empire does not affect the current economic situation in Equestria, but I personally view it to be the event that could save Equestria from eventual economic collapse. The Crystal Empire is a new and emerging market and offers the opportunity for Equestria to finally have a dual currency system, since two political powers are allowed to exist. Dual currency systems, or multi-currency systems, obviously have different values for currency, but that's not the only difference. With 2 or more currencies running around, there's bound to be more than one entity printing money, a separate country or government. With this, there are bound to be tariffs protecting each country's commodities from being ravaged by another, and the value of each currency fluctuates with the wealth and stability of its mother entity. In this system, commodities are far more valuable than precious metal or paper money. Things such as wheat, potatoes, and other necessary produce are always far more stable than the banknotes, for however the population rises or falls, each person needs only a certain amount of wheat to survive, no more and no less. This ensures the value of wheat to be directly proportional to the population where it's grown, and as such, any attempt at dramatically changing the price of a staple commodity must be done through artificial scarcity. The dual currency system requires that 2 or more nations trade with each other, and this is ironically the only way a capitalist country can be sustained for any prolonged period. For if a capitalist society is a closed circuit or system, there cannot be unlimited growth with limited resources, and eventually investor interest will crumble along with the stock exchange. Open up the channels of communication to other countries or governments, however, and the inflow of ideas and markets will create a market without limit. The market of ideas. MLP has a city that functions much like Wall Street or New York. This place is Manhattan, which I hope to have something similar to the NYSE. One of the major reasons the economy is like what it is in our world is because of the advent of the banking system. With banking, it became possible for merchants to accrue enough funds to rival that of the nobility. However, they didn't have the political power necessary to cross that divide. It then follows that alliances between merchants or cartels are formed as they gain political power in this way. When the merchant class gains political power, it creates a system similar to Parliament or the contemporary legislative system here in the United States, such as unions or lobbyists. Due to this, it becomes possible to transition to form a large middle class through the progression of independent growth in capitalist philosophies, as opposed to a stratification of a noble class and a serfdom class. Curiously enough, banks do well off a single economy system, but they really start to thrive once the bank as an entity is allowed to invest in new and emerging markets. Dual, or rather multi-currency systems, also increase the flow of ideas into a host country, indirectly causing the movements of liberalism and education. For in a multi-currency economy, the caste system is cast aside in favor of capitalist ideas and philosophies. Consequently, I believe that if the Crystal Empire and Equestria are to exist together without being under economic turmoil, a stock and commodity market must develop between the two in order to provide economic stability and to prevent future financial collapse. Thanks for listening to my little musings on macroeconomics.